At sunrise the street looked like a sleepy postcard, pink sky, birds arguing gently in the maple tree, my coffee steaming like a tiny locomotive. Then a diesel roar ripped the morning in half. A yellow bulldozer snorted onto my property like a rhinoceros in a tea shop and took a bite out of my driveway. Gravel spit everywhere. My mug levitated, then landed on the porch rail in a little ceramic panic. For a second I thought I was still dreaming, because the driver wore a bright neon vest and the kind of sunglasses that make people bad at apologies. But dreams don't dig trenches, and this machine was hungry. Karen was standing beside it with her clipboard like a general surveying the battlefield. Her bob haircut was so sharp it could fillet a salmon. Per HOA compliance, she sang, as if we were at a musical and the opening number was called I Own Everything I Can Point At. Non-conforming aggregate. Non-compliant slope. Non-approved color. She pronounced color like it could be a felony. The bulldozer lunged forward and shaved off another slab. A plume of dust rolled up the block. Mr. Hawkins across the street raised his newspaper like a shield. Somewhere, a wind chime tried to file a complaint. I shouted, "Hey!" in the classic neighborhood dialect, which translates loosely to "Are you kidding me right now?" The driver killed the engine just long enough for me to say 5 additional syllables, then cranked it again like he'd been allergic to silence since 2003. That's when the screen door banged open and Grandpa stormed out, heroic in flannel pajama pants, white undershirt, and slippers that had clearly seen combat. He carried his shovel like a ceremonial sword. "If that tin rhino takes one more bite," he announced to the morning, "I am going to make sure you regret it forever." He pointed the shovel at Karen, then at the bulldozer, then at the sky, because intimidation is geometry. Karen didn't blink. "Sir, the HOA approved a compliance correction," she said. "We're removing your illegal driveway before it depreciates property values. You should be thanking us." She smiled the smile of a person who had never once thanked a stop sign for stopping. Grandpa took 2 measured steps down the porch and whispered to me without breaking eye contact, "Check the binder." That meant the sacred blue binder in the hall closet, the one with warranties and receipts and the unflattering family photo the DMV uses to haunt us. I bolted inside. The binder was right where Grandpa keeps it, balanced on a stack of paint swatches and a jar of screws that contains 2 screws and 43 mysterious cousins. Papers flapped like gulls as I flipped. Driveway permit. City inspection sign-off. HOA letter acknowledging receipt. Another letter approving the exact mix and pattern. I grabbed them all, the archival proof of our innocence, and sprinted back out. The bulldozer roared again. Grandpa stood in front of it, shovel grounded like a staff. The driver revved, then hesitated in the face of Grandpa's ancient farm stare. The one that says I have seen droughts and locusts and your little machine is a toddler with a spoon. Karen blew a whistle she absolutely did not need to own. "Proceed," she trilled, as if she'd just launched a parade of hubris. "Wait," I shouted, waving the papers. I read fast, tripping over legalese like pebbles. According to section Look Here, approved materials, approved slope, stamped, dated. See. I handed them to Karen. She flicked through the pages with the speed of someone auditioning for the role of person who doesn't care. "These are outdated," she said, tapping a date that wasn't outdated at all. "We updated the guidelines. Bright driveways are out. Subdued, compatible, value-safe tones are in. Our driveway is beige," I said. "It's a loud beige," she replied. Grandpa wheezed a laugh that had no humor in it. "A loud beige," he repeated, tasting the words like bad medicine. "What are you people doing with your lives?" Neighbors started appearing like groundhogs. The twins from the corner filmed on their phones. Mrs. Alvarez whispered, "Is that legal?" Mr. Hawkins lowered his newspaper long enough to say, "I once knew a guy who fought a city with a backhoe. He lost his backhoe." The air smelled like diesel and self-importance. The sun crested the trees and spotlighted the crime. Karen snapped a selfie with the bulldozer as if she'd climbed a mountain. Documenting compliance, she said. For the newsletter. The bulldozer lurched, bucket dipping. Grandpa tromped forward and rapped the metal with his shovel, the tap ringing like a knight's gong. You take 1 more inch, he told the driver, and I pour you a tomb you can't imagine. The driver looked at Karen. She nodded like an empress. The driver shrugged, hit the lever, and the bucket carved into the gravel again. The ground shuddered. A chunk of concrete skidded toward the flower bed. My coffee finally gave up and swan dived off the rail. The bulldozer clanked across something that didn't clank back. It made a different sound, harder, unfriendly, like a metal cough. The machine paused. The driver frowned. He backed up a foot, eased forward, and the bucket scraped a hidden layer beneath the driveway, something older than our beige slabs. Grandpa cocked his head. That's not us, he said. Karen rolled her eyes so hard it changed the wind. It's probably your illegal rebar. Rebar doesn't scream when you touch it, Grandpa muttered. He crouched, palm on the cooling dust, like a tracker in a western. What did we build over, kid? He asked me, which is a great question to ask someone who was 8 when the driveway went in. I shrugged, helpless. The bulldozer crept forward again, teeth biting. A shower of sparks spit out from under the bucket, bright and angry, like July 4th with a temper. Stop! I yelled. The driver definitely did not stop. Karen took 2 triumphant steps closer, clipboard now wielded like a ceremonial paddle. Once we remove your non-compliant slab, a vendor will lay approved stone in tasteful gray. You will receive the invoice. She smiled. Somewhere a lawyer felt a chill. Approved stone, Grandpa said. Is that like a rock that pays its taxes? He turned to the crowd. Anybody else here vote for rocks? A scattered cheer from the twins, who loved chaos. Mrs. Alvarez was now selling muffins because she sees a market and moved. The morning had turned into a block party hosted by a tyrant. Grandpa looked at me and, very quietly, said, "Get the camera." I knew which one. The old camcorder with a dent in the battery door, the one that has survived 2 weddings and a particularly 9-year-old birthday party. I ran inside, dodged the Labrador, grabbed it from the hall closet, and handed it over. Grandpa cradled it like a talisman. Always document the insanity, he said. Future historians will need context. The bulldozer took another chew. Sparks again. A sound like a fork across a steel skillet. The driver swore. There's metal under here, he yelled over the engine. Like a plate. Big one. City utility? I asked, blood cooling. Karen's smile dimmed half a what. Nothing's marked, she said too quickly. If there were utilities, there'd be flags. She gestured at the yard, which had precisely 0 flags unless you count dandelions. Grandpa's eyes narrowed. He knew that look, the tightening that says a plan is being born. Ma'am, the driver called to Karen, I need clearance. I ain't scraping blind over a. Proceed, she snapped, voice sugary and sharp. The HOA will take responsibility. The driveway smelled of scorched metal all through breakfast. Even though the bulldozer had sputtered to a halt, the echoes of those sparks still seemed to hang in the air, like the aftertaste of lightning. Grandpa, unbothered, sat at the table dunking a piece of toast into his coffee, which is illegal in at least 9 states but very on-brand for him. I, meanwhile, was trying to figure out how Karen had just managed to get away with bulldozing our driveway while still holding a clipboard and a self-satisfied smirk. Karen was already back at it the very next morning, strutting through the cul-de-sac in her HOA polo, visor, and that walk that suggested she was auditioning for Suburban Dictator of the Year. She had an audience. Half the neighborhood was lurking in their windows, pretending to water plants that definitely didn't need water, or sweeping the same patch of sidewalk 3 times. People loved a scandal, and our driveway had become reality TV without commercials. Karen waved her clipboard like Moses with the tablet. It's very simple, she announced to no one in particular but loudly enough that everyone heard. The HOA standards have evolved, and some residents are struggling to keep up. Non-conforming structures must be corrected for the good of the community. She turned toward us, dramatic pause, eyes glittering like she'd been waiting all night to deliver the line. This is what compliance looks like. Grandpa leaned on his shovel as though it were a cane, the world's grumpiest wizard. Ma'am, he said evenly, I've seen compliance. It doesn't usually arrive in a bulldozer with a hangover. The neighbors snickered into their sleeves. Karen's smile twitched but held. That's when the paperwork battle began. I brought out our folder of permits and approvals, like an attorney wheeling in a box of smoking guns. Here, I said, waving the stamped approval letter like a flag of truth. This was signed by the HOA president himself. Approved slope, approved concrete mix, everything. Karen flipped through the documents like a magician riffling a deck of cards, then gave me a pitying look. Outdated, she declared. Superseded by the new HOA compliance standards ratified last month. Ratified by who? Grandpa barked. The board, Karen said sweetly. Half the board quit last year because you fined them for hanging Christmas lights, Mrs. Alvarez piped up from her porch. You're the board. Karen beamed like she'd just been called a queen. Exactly. Streamlined decision-making. Grandpa muttered something about streamlined dictatorship, but Karen was already unfurling a glossy pamphlet she'd clearly designed herself. On the cover was a photo of her house, complete with her bland gray driveway that looked like it had been painted with depression. Approved HOA aesthetic standards, the title read in bold font. Inside were rules that looked like they'd been written during a caffeine-fueled power trip. Driveways must be slate gray or charcoal. Front doors must be earth tones only, no blues, no reds. Lawns must be within 15% of Pantone Green 356. Grandpa held the pamphlet at arm's length, squinting as though it were radioactive. You're telling me my driveway is illegal because it's beige? Loud beige, Karen corrected. Very disruptive. The crowd of neighbors rippled with laughter. One of the twins shouted, Your driveway is louder than my Xbox, and nearly fell off his bike. But beneath the comedy was tension. Karen wasn't just playing with driveways, she was rewriting reality to suit herself. Every eye in the neighborhood darted between her and Grandpa, as though watching a championship boxing match. The bulldozer driver, who'd returned with a cigarette and a face that said I am not paid enough for HOA drama, leaned against his machine, waiting for orders. Grandpa wasn't finished. He dug into the blue binder again and produced a signed HOA approval letter with Karen's own initials on the bottom. This is your signature, he said triumphantly, stabbing the page with his finger. You approved it. Karen glanced at the page, then shook her head. Forgery, she said lightly. The gasp from the neighbors was theatrical. You forged your own name? Grandpa demanded. Karen raised her chin. It happens all the time in administrative work. Grandpa's jaw dropped. Lady, the only thing forged here is your common sense. The neighborhood chuckles turned into outright giggles. Karen's cheeks colored, but she quickly regained her composure. She scribbled a note on her clipboard. Non-compliant. Fine of $500 per day until corrected. She tore off a slip and dramatically slapped it onto our mailbox like a parking ticket. Grandpa plucked it off, read it once, and snorted. You fine me for existing, he said. What's next? A penalty for standing upright. Don't tempt me, Karen said, smirking. That was when I noticed a shadow of real panic cross Grandpa's face. But it wasn't fear of Karen. It was that glimmer in his eyes when he got an idea. He leaned close to me and whispered, Get the cement bags from the shed. I blinked. What for? Countercompliance, he said, lips curling into a grin. She wants to play with concrete? Fine. Let's show her what happens when the old man's in charge of the mix. I knew better than to argue. Grandpa had built half the sheds in this town, and if he wanted cement it was going to mean something spectacular. As the bulldozer rumbled back to life, and Karen strutted off to lecture Mr. Hawkins about the glare from his mailbox paint, Grandpa's revenge plan had already begun to take shape. He tapped his shovel on the ground like a drumbeat and muttered, "We'll pour it so thick she won't even wiggle out." And though the neighbors laughed, and Karen strutted, and the morning sun warmed the street, I felt the shift. This wasn't just HOA drama anymore. This was war, and Grandpa was already digging trenches. But the hollow metallic thump from beneath our driveway the day before still lingered in my mind. Whatever Karen had awakened with that bulldozer wasn't finished. And as Grandpa marched toward the shed with that shovel across his shoulder, I realized the next round wouldn't just be about concrete. Something else was waiting under there, and it was just beginning to stir. Grandpa's garage is where ideas go to trip over themselves and come out wearing safety goggles. It smelled like sawdust and childhood, a comforting mix of cedar and oil, like a hardware store had a baby with a museum. He flicked on the light and the single bulb hummed awake, casting a golden halo over his kingdom. The pegboard with tools arranged like constellations, the dented red toolbox shaped vaguely like a treasure chest, the stack of cement bags squatting in the corner like obedient elephants. On the workbench lay a roll of butcher paper. Grandpa tugged it open with a flourish and smoothed it with his palms like a magician preparing the table. "War plan," he declared, scribbling a rectangle that looked enough like a driveway to be legally actionable. He drew our house as a triangle with too much confidence and then, with dramatically tiny motions, sketched Karen's luxury SUV. Boxy, smug, a rectangle with sunglasses. "She parks here," he narrated, tapping the spot where she loved to straddle our property line like it owed her rent. "She loves lines. They make her feel like a ruler." "You're not going to hurt her car," I said. It wasn't a question so much as an insurance policy. "Hurt?" Grandpa scoffed. "I'm going to educate." He pulled a pencil from behind his ear, then another pencil from behind the other ear, then, with mild surprise, a third pencil from his hair. He placed them in a little triangle of destiny and went to work. His sketches morphed into arrows and dotted paths, into little notes that read things like "by midnight equals good" and "hide with petunias," and "call Larry Ree," leftover forms. He drew squiggly lines that clearly meant something to him and absolutely nothing to me. But the gist of it shone through. Concrete would be involved, and gravity would be an accomplice. He paused, eyes tilting toward the ceiling as if listening to a radio no one else could hear. "We work with time, not against it," he said, tapping the paper. "Patience is the strongest mix." He circled the spot where Karen's tires usually kissed the edge of our drive, right where the bulldozer had chewed and stopped and found the hidden plate. "Right here," he murmured, almost fond. "We make it easy to step into a mistake." I glanced toward the driveway, where the morning's drama had settled into a nervous quiet. The metallic seam glinted beneath torn gravel, an eyelid half open. "And what about that?" I asked. "The plate. We respect the dead," Grandpa said, which was not the answer I expected. "And the buried. And the poorly documented." He tugged an old file box from beneath the bench, the cardboard sides soft and honorable with age. "Every house keeps a diary in the ground. City forgot a page." He wiggled his eyebrows, which in Grandpa was the same as a parade. While he rummaged, I texted a few neighbors. "Any idea what was under this street in the dark ages?" Mr. Hawkins replied with a selfie of him holding a rotary phone like a relic. The twins sent a meme of a dragon sleeping under asphalt. Mrs. Alvarez pinged. "My cousin says old trolley lines used to run down Maple 40 years ago. Might be a maintenance plate. Might be a Cold War storm hatch. Might be a prank by the sewer department." "A prank by the sewer department feels spiritually correct," I told Grandpa. He grunted, produced a city map from 1978 and spread it next to the butcher paper. Faded lines like veins ran under our block. He traced them with a finger stained by 100 project. "They moved the water main in '79, he said softly, nostalgia sneaking up on him. "But if they capped an access, they might have left a plate. And if they left a plate, someone wrote it down in a file and then retired to Arizona." He straightened, sharpened his pencil with a pocket knife that had probably been on the moon, and returned to the battlefield diagram. The plan was gloriously simple in the way only complicated things are after you've decided to be brave. It did not include schematics I could testify about in court. It included vibes. There would be forms that looked like planters. There would be a hose that looked like a hose because it was a hose, but a purposeful one. There would be a strategic midnight, a gentle pour, and a sunrise that made a point. We would not harm anyone. We would simply remind Karen that gravity, once invited, writes very legible letters. "Larry," Grandpa said suddenly, tapping his phone with an index finger that could depress a doorbell and settle an argument in the same motion. "Larry works over at the supply yard and speaks fluent Grandpa." After a few rings, a voice crackled through the speaker like barbecue smoke. "Yeah. You still got those short forms from the patio job?" Grandpa asked. "The curved ones." "Maybe." "Why?" "For my garden," Grandpa said solemnly. "I am in a curvy mood." "Ah," Larry replied, weight of the world in that syllable. "How curvy we talking?" "Neighborly," said Grandpa. "And instructive." "I can drop M by after closing," Larry said. "You didn't hear it from me." Grandpa grinned. "I didn't hear anything. My hearing aids are out for maintenance." After he hung up, he turned back to me with the look he gets just before we do something that ends up as a story at Thanksgiving. "We're going to need petunias," he said. "And a sign that says, wet paint, but actually means, mind your business." We spent the afternoon staging the set. Grandpa, who can turn camouflage into theater, arranged planter boxes along the driveway's wounded edge. He filled them with soil like a pastry chef icing a cake with dirt. The twins volunteered to paint popsicle stick labels: patience, mercy, compliance, and one that simply read Karen, which we buried for luck. The Labrador supervised with the solemnity of a foreman who has seen too many corners cut. Karen prowled the sidewalk at a safe scowl, narrating to her phone about active corrections in progress for her HOA group chat, where emojis probably go to die. Every so often, a soft thump trembled up from the plate as if something below was clearing its throat. Each time I met Grandpa's eyes, he'd nod like a conductor acknowledging the percussion. "Rhythm section's awake," he murmured. "A rumor started by dinner. City inspectors might roll through tomorrow," which Karen treated like Christmas. She was already practicing her speech about swift community leadership when we ducked back into the garage for Act 2. Night deepened into a blueberry bruise, cicadas stitching an electrical sound across the dark. Grandpa laid out his tools with librarian precision. "We are artists," he whispered, tugging on work gloves. "Our medium is accountability." "Accountability has a very specific consistency," I said. "Lumpy until you make it right," he agreed. He installed the forms with a tenderness that would have humbled a wedding planner. If you drove by, you'd have said, "What a quaint little garden expansion, how domestic, how neighborly." If you stood within arm's length the way we did, you'd have noticed how the curves embraced the spot where Karen's tires always came to rest like a bad habit. You'd have admired the way the planters looked decorative but were, in fact, a polite invitation to a lesson. The neighborhood had a way of pretending everything was fine until it absolutely wasn't. Birds chirped, sprinklers ticked, the Labrador yawned like he was retired from caring. But right there in the middle of our battle-scarred driveway sat Karen's pride and joy, a luxury SUV so shiny it reflected the clouds like it had a sky subscription. She had parked it half on our gravel wound, half on the spot Grandpa had christened with fresh concrete in the dead of night. The new section still wore its sheen of damp patience, glossy as wet clay, promising permanence to anything foolish enough to rest on it. Karen, of course, had been foolish enough. She flung her door open, heels clicking like a soundtrack, and waved to the arriving city trucks as if she'd organized a parade. "Over here!" she called, her voice bright and brittle, the kind of cheer that has caffeine and vengeance in equal parts. "The non-compliant driveway I warned you about." Grandpa stood on the porch, coffee in one hand, shovel in the other, looking like a man watching birds fly straight into a window. She parked in the pour, he whispered to me, almost reverently. She's literally cementing her own fate. The trucks fanned out. One bore the city utilities logo, another said Public Works, and the third was a mystery van with a yellow light spinning lazily on top, like bureaucracy had decided to cosplay as Batman. Out came inspectors. Clipboards, reflective vests, one guy who looked like he'd been dragged from bed and still hadn't forgiven his alarm clock. They clustered around the torn section of our driveway, eyeing the exposed steel plate like archaeologists who'd accidentally unearthed a dragon's ribcage. Karen marched up, thrusting her clipboard forward like a sword. "This is the violation," she declared. "Non-approved materials, loud beige, slope too aggressive. And this," she gestured to the plate, "this hazard has been here for years. I demand correction." One inspector knelt, tapped the plate with a wrench, and frowned. "That's not on any of our maps," he muttered. Karen seized the moment. "See? Unregistered, unsafe, non-compliant." Another inspector gave her a flat look. "Ma'am, you're not with the city. You're HOA board president," she announced. "Oh," the man said, tone flattening further. "Volunteer." The neighbors snorted laughter into their sleeves. Karen pretended not to hear, but her smile stiffened like it had been ironed. Meanwhile, Grandpa was already in motion. He ambled toward the SUV, shovel tucked under his arm, pretending to be curious. The concrete around Karen's back tires had settled beautifully, still damp enough to grip, solid enough to matter. He squatted down and tapped it with the handle. "Firm," he murmured. "Very firm. Like a handshake, you remember." I crouched beside him. "She has no idea, does she? She thinks rules protect her," Grandpa said. "But rules only work if the ground agrees. And the ground is on my side." He winked. The inspectors circled, muttering about underground utilities, liability, permits lost to time. Karen kept interrupting with words like compliance, safety, and property values, which only made the men write slower. Grandpa stood, dusted off his hands, and raised his voice just enough for the crowd gathering on lawns. "Funny thing," he said casually, "if you park a car on unset concrete, it's like putting a candle in a cake. Except the cake gets harder, not softer." Karen froze. "What did you say?" "Concrete remembers," Grandpa replied. "It'll hold onto that tire like a vice." She whipped around to her SUV, heels slipping on gravel. Her hands flew to the driver's door, yanking it open. She slid into the leather seat, started the engine, and gunned it. The car roared, wheels spun, but the back tires refused to budge. The concrete clung with all the patience of geology. Smoke rose, rubber screamed, and the car lurched forward an inch before thunking back into place with a cemented sigh. The crowd gasped. A kid shouted, "She's stuck." Someone else yelled, "Concrete karma." Phones came up like a paparazzi ambush. The tow truck driver who'd arrived to escort the city crew doubled over laughing. Karen's face appeared in the window, pale with fury. She slammed it open. "This is vandalism," she shrieked. "You sabotaged my vehicle." Grandpa leaned on his shovel, serene as a monk. "No sabotage," he said. "Just physics. You parked on fresh work. Any fool could see the forms." He pointed at the petunias lined neatly along the edge, their labels still spelling patience, mercy, compliance, and the prophetic Karen. The inspectors turned, eyebrows climbing. "You poured this last night?" one asked. Grandpa shrugged. "Improvement project. Beautification. Entirely compliant with city code." He handed over the signed permit he'd pulled from the sacred binder, complete with Larry's supply receipt. The inspectors examined it, nodded, and tucked it away. Karen exploded. "This is harassment. Collusion. You're all conspiring against me." The tow truck driver snorted so hard he choked on his gum. "Lady," he wheezed, "I ain't towing that without a jackhammer. That car's part of the driveway now." The crowd roared with laughter. Kids set up a lemonade stand again, this time advertising Carenade, $1 per meltdown. Someone started taking bets on whether she'd call the fire department or the governor next. Karen stomped out of the SUV, heels clicking like tiny explosions. She jabbed a finger at Grandpa. You will pay for this. I'll sue you. I'll sue your dog. I'll sue your ancestors. Grandpa tipped his imaginary hat. Be sure to include the petunias. They're the masterminds. But even as the comedy peaked, I felt the tension humming under the ground. The inspectors had turned serious, crouched around the plate, whispering into radios. One tapped it again. The echo came back hollow, resonant, alive. Another frowned at a handheld meter that beeped in confused alarm. There's something down here, he said, voice low. Something big. Karen whirled on them. Well, fix it. You're city employees. But the inspector only shook his head, eyes narrowed at the seam. This isn't ours, he said. This belongs to someone else. The wind shifted, cooler, carrying the metallic tang of ozone. The crowd quieted, laughter dimming to murmurs. Even Karen fell silent, her threats withering mid-sentence. Grandpa's eyes gleamed as he leaned toward me. The trap worked, he whispered, but the stage is bigger than I thought. And then, with perfect comic timing, the concrete around Karen's back tires let out a faint crack, not breaking, not failing, but tightening, as if the ground itself had decided to join the HOA drama. Her car sagged another inch deeper into its new home. The audience gasped. Karen screamed. The inspectors exchanged worried looks. Grandpa chuckled softly, shovel glinting in the afternoon sun. Lesson 1, he said. Never pick a fight with time. Lesson 2, he paused, eyes fixed on the plate, which had just given the faintest echoing knock, like a hand testing the lid of a coffin. Lesson 2's still writing itself. By the next morning, our quiet cul-de-sac had become the hottest show in town. Word had spread like butter on hot toast. Karen's SUV was stuck, fused to the driveway like an overpriced hood ornament in a cement museum. People from 3 blocks away showed up with folding chairs. Someone even dragged out a popcorn machine, and the smell of melted butter wafted through the air like a carnival announcing itself. Karen, of course, was in full meltdown mode. She marched circles around her trapped car, heels stabbing at the gravel, her voice oscillating between a shriek and a sob. This is illegal. Criminal. Domestic terrorism, she shouted, waving her clipboard so violently she nearly decapitated a lawn gnome. Her SUV sat tilted slightly backward, back wheels locked in Grandpa's fresh concrete, looking as embarrassed as a car could look. Grandpa, meanwhile, had stationed himself on the porch with his coffee and shovel, the picture of casual victory. You know, he said loudly enough for the crowd, most folks put their car in a garage if they don't want it cemented. That's why they invented garages. Or common sense. Either works. The crowd howled. Kids ran in circles chanting, cemented. Cemented, like it was a playground rhyme. A teenager live-streamed the whole scene, narrating it like a sports commentator. And here comes Karen, round 3 of yelling at the sky. Oh, and Grandpa delivers another shovel joke. Folks, you love to see it. Karen was not amused. She whipped out her phone and dialed 911. Yes, police? Emergency. My vehicle has been sabotaged, cemented, trapped against my will. I demand immediate response. She turned to the crowd, triumphant. The law will fix this. The law did show up, but not the way she expected. 2 officers arrived, stepping out of their cruiser with that look cops get when they've been told the emergency is both urgent and absurd. They took in the scene. Karen's SUV fused to a driveway, a cheering crowd, Grandpa sipping coffee like a talk show host. One officer rubbed his temples before even asking a question. Ma'am, your car is in concrete? Yes. Karen screeched. This criminal, she jabbed a finger at Grandpa, poured cement around my tires to trap me. Arrest him immediately. The officer turned to Grandpa. Sir, is this true? Grandpa tipped his shovel in greeting. Nope. She parked in a fresh pour. Gravity did the rest. I can't be blamed for science. The second officer crouched down, touching the concrete. He gave a low whistle. Set good. That ain't coming out easy. He looked at Grandpa. Nice finish, though. Karen shrieked so loud the twins plugged their ears and pretended to faint. You can't compliment him. He's a vandal. The first officer sighed. Ma'am, technically you parked on an active construction site. Those forms were clearly in place. There's even a sign that says, "Do not touch." That's a suggestion. Karen snapped. No, ma'am, the officer said patiently. That's a warning. The crowd roared again. Mrs. Alvarez was now selling muffins labeled Concrete Crunch. The lemonade stand had expanded into Caronade plus free refills if she screams. Even the Labrador had joined the festivities, wagging his tail at every burst of laughter like he was clapping along. But Karen wasn't backing down. If anything, her rage had mutated into full performance art. She called AAA. She called the fire department. She even tried the mayor's office, claiming a driveway conspiracy. Each time she spoke louder, more desperate, until the tow truck finally arrived. The driver, a burly man with grease-stained coveralls and a grin too wide for the situation, took one look at the SUV and doubled over laughing. Lady, he wheezed, wiping tears from his eyes, I can't tow that. That's part of the house now. Just try. Karen snapped. The driver, still chuckling, hooked his chains and revved the tow. The SUV strained, groaned, and then, nothing. The concrete held firm, smug and immovable. The truck lurched forward but only managed to squeal its tires. The audience cheered like it was a championship game. Someone shouted, Concrete. 1, tow truck. 0. The driver gave up, shaking his head. You'll need a jackhammer. Maybe a blessing from God. Karen turned purple. I will sue everyone, she screamed. Grandpa raised his mug in salute. Don't forget to include the cement manufacturer. The laughter was so loud it could have powered a carnival ride. But then, in the midst of all this comedy, something shifted. The inspectors from the previous day had returned. They weren't laughing. They were clustered around the steel plate under our driveway, clipboards in hand, radios buzzing. One knelt down with a stethoscope pressed against the metal. He frowned, then straightened, whispering to another. What's going on? I asked Grandpa, uneasy. He followed my gaze. The inspectors looked worried. Too worried. One adjusted his radio and muttered, getting elevated readings. It's active down there. Karen, sensing she was losing the crowd, seized the moment. Yes. Active hazard. Unsafe. That's what I've been saying. But the inspector shook his head. Not unsafe. Unknown. The crowd quieted. Even the kids stopped chanting. The steel plate seemed to thrum in the silence, a low hum, steady as a heartbeat. One inspector stepped back, pale. Whatever's under there, it's waking up. Karen's SUV groaned as the concrete shifted slightly, tightening its grip on the tires. Karen shrieked and leapt back, convinced it was swallowing her whole. The tow truck driver crossed himself. The police exchanged uneasy glances. Grandpa just smiled, shovel gleaming in the late sun. Well, he said calmly, looks like Karen's tantrum dug up more than just my driveway. He tilted his head toward the humming plate. And if I'm not mistaken, we're all about to find out what's been sleeping under our feet. The ground shivered, just once, enough to rattle coffee cups and send the lemonade stand wobbling. The crowd gasped. Karen clutched her clipboard like it was a life raft. And then came the sound. 3 hollow knocks, deliberate and slow, echoing up from beneath the earth. The courthouse smelled like old wood, dust, and too many bad decisions crammed into one building. Karen strutted through the front doors like she owned the place, her clipboard clutched against her chest as if it were a royal decree. She wore a blazer that screamed executive and heels that clicked like typewriters on a deadline. Grandpa followed 2 steps behind, calm as a farmer at a county fair. His shovel left at home but his smirk very much present. He carried the sacred blue binder under his arm, the kind of binder that has humbled bureaucrats and enraged Karens for decades. The courtroom filled fast. Neighbors had shown up like it was the sequel to a blockbuster. Mrs. Alvarez smuggled in muffins, the twins wore shirts that said concrete happens, and even the tow truck driver found a seat in the back, holding his phone like he was ready to livestream. Karen's SUV was still cemented to our driveway, which only added to the hype. Everyone wanted to see if Grandpa's concrete justice would stand. When the judge entered, Karen immediately leapt up. "Your Honor," she cried, "this is a matter of sabotage, property destruction, and targeted harassment. My vehicle has been unlawfully imprisoned in cement by this man." She spun dramatically, pointing at Grandpa like she was unveiling the villain in a play. The judge raised one eyebrow. "Imprisoned in cement?" "Yes," Karen gasped, clutching her clipboard. "My luxury SUV, worth more than this man's entire property, was maliciously trapped by his so-called home improvements. I demand justice." Grandpa cleared his throat, stepped forward, and placed the blue binder gently on the bench like it was holy scripture. "Your Honor," he said, "she parked on an active project. There were signs, there were forms, and there was plenty of common sense available that she chose to ignore. The cement didn't trap her car. She volunteered." The neighbors chuckled. The judge held up a hand. "Order." He looked to Karen. "Do you have evidence of sabotage?" Karen slammed down a stack of glossy pamphlets, the same HOA aesthetic standards she'd invented. "Here," she declared. "These prove his driveway was non-compliant, and his pour was unauthorized. He defied the HOA, and in doing so, endangered property values for the entire community." The judge thumbed through the pamphlet, unimpressed. "This appears to be printed at Staples," he said flatly. "And your bylaws?" Karen blinked. "Excuse me." "Bylaws," the judge repeated. "The HOA's official, legally filed bylaws with the county. Do you have them?" Karen shuffled her papers. "Well, I didn't bring that copy, but—" Grandpa leaned over with the timing of a comedian and plopped down a copy from the binder. "Page 42, he said. "Driveways approved beige, slope approved, city inspector signed. Even her initials are there." The judge adjusted his glasses. "This is true, ma'am. This is your signature." Karen flushed crimson. "Forgery!" she shrieked. Grandpa raised a brow. "So I forged your signature on a form approving myself? What kind of idiot crime is that?" The courtroom burst into laughter. The judge banged his gavel, lips twitching like he was holding back his own smile. Then came the best part. Grandpa slid out a series of photos, clear, high-res shots of the fresh cement, the wooden sign that read "Do Not Touch," and Karen's SUV nestled right on top, like a cherry on a cake. The final photo featured the dog's paw print in the corner. "That," Grandpa said solemnly, "is Exhibit Paw. Proof the pour was real, visible, and very much off-limits." The judge studied the photos, then glanced at Karen. "Why did you park on wet cement, ma'am?" Karen's mouth opened and closed like a goldfish gasping for air. Because he tricked me." Grandpa folded his arms. "I told her gravity would do the rest." The twins cheered from the back. "Gravity for the win." The judge sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Ms. Karen, not only does the evidence show you parked on active work, but your forged aesthetic standards hold no legal authority. Furthermore, your harassment of this man and misuse of HOA power are concerning." He rapped his gavel. "Case dismissed. Damages will be paid to Mr. Grandpa for wasted materials and labor." The courtroom erupted. People clapped, cheered, even whistled. Mrs. Alvarez tossed muffins like bouquets. The tow truck driver shouted, "Legend!" and fist-pumped the air. Karen, however, was apoplectic. "This isn't over!" she screamed, clutching her clipboard like a lifeline. "You'll regret this. All of you. Grandpa, ever the showman, leaned on the railing and addressed her in a stage whisper the whole room could hear. Sweetheart, the only one regretting anything is your SUV, and it regrets trusting you to park it. The laughter drowned her out as bailiffs escorted her from the room, still shrieking about appeals and conspiracies. But as we filed out into the hallway, the victory sweet and solid, a shadow lingered in the back of my mind. The inspectors had been in the gallery too, whispering to one another, their faces tight with unease. One of them spoke into his radio, eyes flicking toward me and Grandpa. Proceeding with excavation clearance, he murmured. Plate activity increasing. The words sent a chill down my spine. This was bigger than HOA drama, bigger than Karen's SUV. Something under our driveway was waking up, and the whole city knew it now. Grandpa caught my eye, his smirk fading into something sharper. Courtroom's done, he said softly. But the real trial's about to start. The driveway was silent when we got back from court, but it was the kind of silence that felt like a pause before thunder. Karen's SUV sat exactly where it had been, still embedded in Grandpa's concrete trap, the tires hugging stone like lovers who wouldn't let go. The crowd had thinned, but whispers lingered, neighbors pretending to check their mail while really just waiting for Act 2. Karen stormed into the cul-de-sac with her phone glued to her ear, spitting venom into the receiver. Yes, I demand county inspectors. Yes, an emergency. Yes, he's endangering the whole neighborhood. She turned toward us, eyes blazing, and sneered. Enjoy your little win in court. The city's going to bulldoze your entire property when they find out what's under there. Grandpa leaned on his shovel, calm as a saint with a mischievous streak. Lady, if the city wants to bulldoze, let him. They'll probably have better paperwork than you. The crowd chuckled. Karen scowled deeper. That's when the rumble began again. A low vibration under our shoes, like the earth clearing its throat. The steel plate beneath the ruined section of driveway trembled, rattling pebbles and making the Labrador whimper. One of the city inspectors, still lingering nearby, barked into his radio. It's happening again, contain the area. Before anyone could react, the plate shifted. Not just a knock this time, but a full lurch upward, a groaning protest of rusted bolts against time. A seam split wider, releasing a hiss of stale air that smelled metallic, old, and wrong. The ground pulsed with life, and the SUV sank another inch into its concrete coffin. Karen screamed, clutching her clipboard like it could ward off Armageddon. The neighbors froze, 100 eyes fixed on the driveway. The twins whispered, "Dragon," and no one laughed. Mrs. Alvarez crossed herself. The tow truck driver muttered, "Nope," and started backing toward his truck. Grandpa's grin didn't falter, but his voice dropped low enough for only me to hear. "Kid, I've poured a lot of driveways in my life. This ain't no driveway problem. This is history's mess, and it just picked us to open it." The plate groaned again, louder, shaking dust from the maple tree. The inspectors scrambled, shouting into radios, waving people back. Red and blue lights washed across the street as emergency vehicles pulled in, sirens choking off mid-wail. Firefighters unrolled hoses, not because of flames, but because water is what you bring when you don't know what else to bring. Karen shrieked over the chaos. "See? I told you. Unsafe. Hazardous. This is his fault." But no one was listening anymore. The ground had everyone's full attention. And then it happened. With a deafening crack, the steel plate buckled upward, a jagged gap yawning wide. A surge of light, pale, unnatural, like moonlight run through a broken prism, spilled out and painted every face ghostly white. The ground heaved, and something moved below, something massive, something patient that had been waiting too long. The crowd screamed. Phones flew up, recording history or a horror film or both. Karen dropped her clipboard for the first time in recorded memory. Grandpa just straightened his back, his shovel gleaming in the strange light. He whispered, almost happily, "Well, kid, looks like we dug up more than HOA trouble." The light pulsed again, brighter this time, and the rumbling grew teeth. Whatever was under that driveway was coming up, soon. The last thing I heard before the world roared was Karen's voice, shrill and terrified, echoing off the houses. "What have you done?" And then the ground split wide open.